Hello and welcome to yet another episode of What Bottle is on Your Table Tonight, and that is part of the Northern Wine Guy podcast series that you're listening to. I've got a very, very special guest for you today. A little bit shell-shocked, and I'm a little bit overall because she's one of my biggest, or I'm one of her biggest fans, I should say. She's probably had never heard of me, but more importantly, it's actually more about what she's done for the industry, and I'm thrilled to share it with you shortly. My guest is the one and only Jane Anson. If you don't know who Jane Anson is, you surely don't know anything about wine. That's my opinion anyway. Basically, Jane has lived in Bordeaux since 2003, and I'm looking forward to finding out how that's been as well. But you should know her from the fact that she's obviously been writing about Bordeaux and more specifically just generally about fine wine and orientation around wine for won't spoil it too much and say quite how long because that would be inappropriate, but for a vast amount of time, huge amount of experience. I call her personally the voice of Bordeaux. That's basically the way that I use and describe Jane to others. But she's won so many awards for her writing, including the Louis Roeder Wine Online Communicator Award of the Year back in 2020. She was the Born Digital Best Editorial in 2020, and she's also the winner of the IWSC 2023 Wine Communicator Trophy. She's written dozens, literally over a dozen wine and travel books, anything from Inside Bordeaux to the Club of Nine to Angelus. To the and the Bordeaux Legends and a history of the 1855 first growth, which I really wish I'd actually gone back to, given I was writing about that last week. So that's slightly embarrassing, Jane. But Jane was the first woman to deliver the André Simon lecture for the International Wine and Food Society since the lecture series began way back in 1971. And she wasn't speaking back in 1971, just to be clear. She was speaking in June 2020 on the subject of terroir in Bordeaux. It's a brilliant pleasure, and it really is my pleasure to introduce you. Jane, thank you so much for being a guest on the show, and welcome.
Andrew, thank you. And thank you for that unbelievably nice introduction.
Not at all. No, the pleasure's all mine, and really, I do honestly refer to you as the voice of Bordeaux. And I guess I want to sort of grab that straight away, but I'll just sort of backstep slightly because obviously we were mentioning just before we started that we like this to be relatively educational as well, and sort of look at those sort of challenges that you faced and how you sort of got to where you are basically one of the most respected writers and speakers about wine in the world, and it's more how did you find it to start with? What really sort of got you into the drinks industry and drove that passion to get to where you are now?
I think I was lucky that when I started, I didn't know what I didn't know. I mean, that's probably true for everybody, but I arrived in Bordeaux in 2003 and I'd already been a journalist for 10 years before that, but I hadn't been specializing in wine. I'd started to become interested in wine, mainly South African wine and Italian wine, not really French wine. And when I got to Bordeaux, I approached it as a journalist. So luckily, I didn't know that I was supposed to be massively overawed by Michael Broadbent and Stephen Spurrier and all of these incredible names. And I just slowly but surely approached wine the way I had done when I was writing about travel. I lived in Hong Kong for a long time. I did some stuff about politics, and I was in Hong Kong at the time of the handover. And so I just approached it in a way of who are the key people in this region? What do I need to know? What are the questions I need to ask? What are the questions they don't want me to ask is really, really important when you're writing about wine, just as much as when you're writing about any other more serious subject in many ways. It's the questions that they don't want to tell you is how you differentiate from being just doing marketing and PR for a region and actually helping the people who are going to buy the wines. So yeah, I think that was really my way in. And it probably took me a good, really honestly, 4 or 5 years here before I started to feel like I knew enough about the pieces of the jigsaw that put Bordeaux together to then start to study more seriously about wine drinking, wine tasting. So then I did this awesome course called the Duad, which is like a year-long tasting diploma at the Institute of Enology here. And I'd done the WSET things in London, but it was only when I did the Duad that I really felt, okay, I kind of get much better what it takes to make a good Bordeaux, what can go wrong along the growing season, and then start to pick out the different flavors in a finished bottle of wine that tell you, like you can see that, like if it's been a rainy year, then you can see that there are slightly more leafy characters or the fruit isn't quite as beautifully ripe as in a hotter year. And there are so many tells that no matter what the winemakers do, no matter how skillful they are, you can still see those things. But yeah, it was slowly but surely in answer to your question.
No, it's fabulous, and thank you for that. And I think it's interesting and very worthwhile for everyone to realize that everyone's always evolving with their learning as well. And it's not something that you can sort of just click your fingers at and become amazing at. Far from it. It's building up that experience, that exposure, as you mentioned. Obviously, the likes of the DUAD tasting diploma as well, giving you further insight into the region, and therefore becoming more of an expert before you became the expert, if you like. And I think
Exactly.
that's
And it goes back again to knowing who the key people are. Who can you ask those questions to? Don't be afraid to ask the questions that you don't know the answers to. And don't be embarrassed by the fact that you don't know them. Because I think the real people who really are experts, they couldn't be happier to share it because they've got nothing to prove. They don't need to hide anything. They couldn't be happier to share and answer those questions.
absolutely. And it's funny you say that. We had a few programs before in the series, a lot of discussion around that, still that awkwardness around if you go to a tasting and it's not your region that you really know about, or you don't feel very knowledgeable, or even people that are just starting in the industry and having a look at who's around them, and they, occasionally spot a couple of people that they recognize that are very high profile. And there's that slight awkwardness or embarrassment because they feel they should know more. But as you said, the reality is you're never going to know as much as that expert because they've had that many years experience. Until you get to that point where you've had decades of experience and knowledge in the area, they're always going to be that person that you should really go to be more knowledgeable, find out the answer to your questions. And as you say, I think it's just that hurdle sometimes, and it's people's awkwardness as well. Naturally, I think human nature possibly as well, and especially after post-COVID, I think that's not helped. But I think that is the great message: is that you're not there, not supposed to know everything. You're learning. You're always evolving and understanding. And certainly that's a lesson for the likes of myself as well. When I go to a number of different tastings, as I'm sure you've been to many, 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 but thousand, but you go to sort of one or an area where I'm not used to, and there is that just initial awkwardness where you think, I'm not sure if I should really sort of be pushing this. Well, actually, I should be, because I need to understand that knowledge and I need to know more so that I don't feel awkward again the next time, or that I've learned that
Exactly.
extra bit.
And I feel it exactly the same way. If I'm going into a Burgundy tasting, for example, I'm very conscious. And in a way, I'm even more conscious because I know how long it takes to really get to know an area in depth. So I can feel just as nervous if I'm going into a tasting of an area that I don't know so well. Something that is not really about wine, but something that I've launched 3 years ago, which I'm just about to do the 3rd edition of. We're just closing up the applications this year. This week is called the Bordeaux Mentor Week, and that's exactly what it's aimed at. Is aimed at getting young people who are starting out in wine, whether they're sommeliers or whether they're consultants, whether they're wine writers, whatever area of wine it is, but who have some kind of barrier to entry, whether it's because of economic reasons or country that they're from, or whatever it might be, trying to give them like a week boot camp in Bordeaux where they really are exposed to those high level people who do know the answers to these questions, and I've pre-vetted them to know that they're also nice people and are open and are kind of happy to have that exchange. And it's been a really fantastic experience for me as well, because like you say, there's always something new to learn, and just as much from the people who are coming into the industry as those who've been in it for a long time.
Absolutely. And I was going to mention actually that because it's still open at the moment. So for those that are listening afterward, make sure that you get your applications in. It's a fantastic boot camp. I wish I was there. I've already looked at the dates, Jane. I can't make it.
You can come and give a talk to them all next year.
But in all seriousness, it's absolutely brilliant, and that's the sort of thing that everyone should feel. And it's about breaking those barriers down to entry of the wine industry more generally, but the drinks industry more generally, and giving those opportunities to people. And I think that's fantastic. So for anyone that's conscious around it or unsure about apply. Please do feel free to see Jane's website. And Jane, I guess that takes me to sort of your move from having worked obviously for the likes of Decanter for so many years, then moving to effectively independence and yourself and the Jane Anson company. How has that evolved and changed sort of you as well? And was that always your goal in the future, you thought, or was it something that you just wanted to move into because you felt you could sort of add more initiatives that were self-designed, if you like?
Yeah, it definitely wasn't something that I always thought I was going to end up doing. I was happy, and Decanter was a wonderful gig. I mean, to be the Bordeaux correspondent for Decanter, it's a pretty jammy gig, really, and it was wonderful in many ways. But I'd been there with them for about 18 years, and I'd just written the book Inside Bordeaux that you mentioned, which you can see it's like an 800-page book.
It is a
And,
whopper.
and that idea of you learn something with everything you do. I learned so much about Bordeaux just by doing the research and writing for this book. Like, I couldn't have written it if I hadn't known a good amount before, but by the process of doing it, I learned so much more. And I started to think, maybe I do have something that I can add with my own voice in a different way. And there was Inside Burgundy, Jasper's a good friend of mine who'd written the Inside Burgundy version, and he had his own site, and there were a couple for Burgundy, but there wasn't one for Bordeaux. And when you look at the value of Bordeaux to the wine industry as a whole, to the fine wine industry, it's many billions of euros per year is generated by Bordeaux, not just that is kept within the Bordeaux region, but which goes to many fine wine merchants around the world, sommeliers, hotels, lots of, there's a big economic ecosystem around Bordeaux. And it's a complicated region. You have, 100,000 hectares, about 6,000 winemakers, and many, many, many different soil types and characters and vintages. So there's plenty to get your teeth into. And also, over the last 10 years, more and more of the world's icon wines are sold through Bordeaux. So the same Bordeaux system also sells Massetto and Opus One, and really a couple of hundred of these really very high profile international icon wines. And so it seemed like, why not? So I kind of bet on myself, really. And I launched my site, and I didn't have outside investors. A lot of these sites do get outside investors. I decided, partly because I didn't want to risk anyone else's money until I knew it could work. And so I just thought, I'm just going to try it. And I worked out how many subscribers I'd need to get to be able to pay myself back for how much it costs to do the database and everything, which obviously I did pay someone else to do. And I thought that would take me a year. And in fact, it took about 3 months after launch to reach that number, which just showed it's not really a reflection on me. That's a reflection on Bordeaux's power as a wine region, because you can buy Bordeaux in any country that basically has commerce and drinks wine, you will find Bordeaux. So about 170 countries worldwide. So it's been great. But I thought, I don't want to launch another critic site in the same way. So I do 1% for the planet. So 1% of my turnover, not profit, but turnover, goes to environmental causes. And from the beginning, I launched this Bordeaux Mentor Week so that I could give back, pay it forward, all of those phrases that we talk about. But I really felt very strongly that I didn't want it just to be about me. I wanted to see if we could talk about wine in a more inclusive way, and just to do things a bit differently.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that's a fantastic story. I think you undersold yourself a little there by saying it was purely Bordeaux, though. I can guarantee that a lot of people wanted to be subscribers to Jane Anson rather than Bordeaux as well. But that's very, very nice of you to say. I think with Bordeaux as well, I'm intrigued. Did you designate or set out to be, were you posted there? Were you set out to go for Bordeaux because you had an affiliation with the wine already and you enjoyed those styles? Or was it that actually just ended up being where you stationed and then instantly you wanted to take in as much information and knowledge as you could in the region?
It was partly my journalist brain. So we were thinking, so my husband was more of a Bordeaux fan than I was. Even when he was a teenager and early 20s, he would buy, well, they were much cheaper then, but he would buy some of those great names, Pape Clement, even Latour, and those, big estates. He would buy them when they weren't crazily expensive. But anyway, so he kind of was thinking of Bordeaux, but I was looking at where could I be posted as a stringer, as a freelancer, and actually be able to sell stories. So we kind of thought, could be Champagne, could be Burgundy, could be Bordeaux. And in the end, we decided Bordeaux is closer to England. It's an hour's flight back to London, where our friends and family still are, in fact. And it was a big enough size, again, economically, historically, number of wines, that there was going to be people who would be interested in me writing about it. So it was kind of a mix of those things, and slightly luck that we moved to Bordeaux in 2003. At the time, there was a guy called Alain Juppé, who was the mayor of Bordeaux, and he was also very important in politics in Paris. So he'd got a lot of new investment coming into the city. So we arrived here just as there were new trams going down. They were really cleaning up the city centre. There were new wine bars and hotels opening. And we're only an hour from the beach here. It seemed like, oh, actually, this turns out to not be such a bad place to live. We
I think
definitely
it was a
thought,
terrible idea, Jane, personally.
I
I
can't believe it.
can't think of any reason why you'd want to be there.
We were sure that we'd be back in London within 2 or 3 years. But yeah, it's now been 20 years later and we're still here.
It's fabulous, and it's there. Well, thank you for being there, because everyone learns, and I can tell you everyone's learning an awful lot through you, through the books that you're writing, through the pieces, and obviously through the website and through the ratings. And I saw even as well another congratulations for you in Costco as well, in that they're using your tasting and notes and obviously ratings for their wines, which is fantastic as well. Obviously, the largest supermarket chain you can find, pretty much. I'd like to say globally, but I'm not sure it's quite globally. But certainly it must be very high up there, because it's the biggest in the US, which automatically puts it very high on the list. So it's incredible.
Thank you.
And of course,
I feel super. Well, it's been wonderful. That's something that's been. It's well, you're doing your own business with this as well. It's really so rewarding when you see people actually giving you good feedback from what you're doing. And the Costco thing, and again, I can't help myself. I should be much better at bigging myself up, but I can't help but say at the moment it's the UK Costco and across, I think, Europe. I'm not yet the only person in the US Costco.
That's just a matter of time to me. That's just a matter of time. It's an incredible achievement, and it's fantastic as well. So that'll even open up all of the other listeners that end up going to Costco. You'll now be seeing exactly who's giving those ratings as well, and hopefully you'll notice that it's Jane with the comments and ratings. That's fantastic. It's amazing. Jane, I'm a little bit, this is kind of in trepidation here, because I'm a little bit worried about what wine you're going to talk about now, because mine's going to pale into insignificance. But I was just wondering what wine you did have on the table this evening.
So I decided to not go with any fancy Bordeaux wines. I was hesitating. I went to a wine auction on Friday, which I never do actually, but it was being held in aid of a charity foundation in Bordeaux, and I thought I was going to go down, and I bid on a 1970 Mouton Rothschild for €100, which is very inexpensive for a 1970 Mouton Rothschild. And I thought, well, shall I open that? It looks like the label is completely shot, like you can't see anything anymore on the label, so it's probably not very good. But anyway, I thought I would rather highlight a smaller producer in Bordeaux who I really love, and it is called Clos Mano. So Clos Mano is a beautiful little producer just in AOC Medoc, so not a expensive appellation. And this particular one that I picked, you see on the label, it says Vines 1850 pre-phylloxera.
Wow.
And this is something which people don't think there is in Bordeaux, which is why I thought it might be a fun one to highlight. So the guy who makes it is called Stéphane Dief, and he came not from a long-term wine family. He worked in a cooperage, so in a barrel makers, before he decided he was just really obsessed with wine, someone who just loved it. And he bought piece by piece, a couple of rows of vines here, a couple of rows of vines there, pieced it all together. And him and his wife slowly built up this estate. And because he was kind of taking bits of vines wherever he could find them, somebody one time called him up and said, oh, I've got this row of really old, they're basically unproductive, they're so old, you're not going to want them, but you might want to buy it and then rip them up and plant something else. So he bought it, but he realized the real beauty of what he had there. So these beautiful, thick, old vines that go back to, he doesn't know exactly when. 1850 sounds lovely.
Wow.
They might be 1870 vines, who knows? But they're a mix of Merlot and Cabernet Sauvignon in this little plot, and he bottles them on their own, separate from the main Clos Mano. And even though they're this incredible historic thing, this bottle, at least it cost me, I don't know how much they are today, but I think it cost me €40. So it's really, that sounds a lot, but really that's very inexpensive for such an incredible historical treasure, which you find up in AOC Medoc. Nobody would think twice about it. And Clos Mano itself, his main thing, so without the 1850, where it would just say Clos Mano, is even less expensive. And I think he's brilliant. He does everything himself. It's all by hand. any he just follows every single little vine, even though they're dotted all over the Medoc. He kind of follows them himself from beginning to end of the season. He's a great winemaker. I really recommend him.
That's amazing. What an amazing story. And yeah, I knew that you were going to outdo me somehow, Jane, but that's just completely blown me out of the water. And
Tell me yours.
well, the irony is, I mean, I've gone Chilean, where I did mention that before, and I'm not sure if you can make it out too well, but it's a
I can. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
Tell me how do I pronounce it?
Cacanes.
Okay, you did that much better than I did.
It's an estate, and now the reason or the funny thing is, the reason that I picked that actually was because it's old vines as well, and I'm really passionate about the old vines, and obviously I sort of communicate it as though they're grandparents. Basically, if you look in family terms, you've got to treasure your grandparents. You know, they've got huge amounts of wisdom. So have old vines. They've got huge amounts of wisdom. They've lived for decades. They understand the soil better than anybody. So I picked this, and I'm doing a couple of different things at the moment. Probably you're probably doing a million different things, but I'm doing a couple of different things. And one of them is I'm looking for grape varietals that are grown in very established regions. So this one, for example, is in Central Valley, so the most obvious place in Chile. But it's Carignan is the grape variety, and there's only 377, I think, hectares in the Central Valley in Chile that's grown there. So it puts it about, I want to say 9th or 10th in the grape varietal list for that region. And I try and focus on that because I love the old vines for one, and this has had 3 decades of, or 3 generations, I should say, of family orientation. So it has the background story, it has a great narrative, but also it's protecting what was great initially. And these are 60, 70-year-old vines that have still got great vibrancy and acidity. And you don't expect that from the Central Valley. I wouldn't expect it to be quite vibrant and relatively elevated in acidity. I thought it'd be a bit more sort of jammy orientated and reduced, and with all that heat that's there. But it's a lovely balance. I like with fatty foods, which unfortunately we're not having Bordeaux weather here at the moment, Jane. We're having very much northern weather, which is wet and cold. So with fatty foods, it's great. And it's the Unduraga, which is one of the biggest. They're one of the biggest family named producers in Chile. But that comes from their Cacanos estate, which is a beautiful little estate, still on the valley floor. But they have this little script area of Carignan, and it's just such an easy flowing, vibrant wine. And I came across it a little bit by chance. It was someone had pointed it out to me, actually, I think from maybe actually the Wine Society, actually, originally, and they sort of suggested have a look at if you can find Central Valley orientated Carignan, and I did, and I found this and absolutely loved it. And it's not expensive, you know, it's under £20 a bottle, I think, so really, really good value and superb for if anyone wants to sort of try a little evolution of it. It's not saying that I don't like Carmenères and Cabernet Sauvignons, etc., but it's just something nice. And I love the narrative around the fact that it's led down by generations as well. It's a family orientated. They're trying to be get towards biodynamic. They're not there yet, and they admit that. But I like that as well. It's transparent about where they're trying to get to, the evolution of it, and the evolution of processes and mechanisms that they're using in the winery and out on the vineyard land to try and get there. It's fantastic. So I love the backstory as well. And it was just I was going to give you something as well. I was gonna come up with a lovely Saint-Emilion Grand Cru that I haven't touched, and we've got it sort of hidden away. And I thought I can't do that. I'll just be embarrassed when I talk to Jane about this.
Oh, don't say that. Well, I'm so glad you picked that. And I think Chile's got some of the oldest vines in the world. I think Australia and Chile got some of the really incredible old vines. And I'm so happy you picked that. And another reason why I picked mine was because, you know, they do that old Sarah Abbott, the MW, that she does the Old Vines Hero, is it called Old Vine Hero Awards?
Yes.
And I think we're about to get the announcement of who's won it this week. I know that they're just so I voted for it. I hope you did too.
I did, and I have a little secret for anyone that's listening afterwards. I've got Sarah coming on the show in a few weeks' time as well. So
she'll be announcing who's won.
Exactly.
Definitely.
So unfortunately, I couldn't convince her to announce it on the show. That was a little bit too much, I think. But I love the backstory, and I think that for anyone that's listening out there as well, and why Jane and I, one of the reasons Jane and I are referencing so much about old vines as well is there's obviously been a big pull of ripping out, unfortunately, in the past, especially in various countries in Europe. I'm not going to name and shame you, but you know who you are. And there's sort of been a big pull out region, and obviously we're I think both of us, as you can hear, are voices of wanting to keep these established. They've got so much to show us, so much to learn from, but also such amazing wines that are produced from such ancient orientated living
You're
organisms.
right. There's the complexity coming from the vines themselves, but there's also hopefully greater resistance to climate change. When you've got very hot vintages, there's something very special about the fact that their roots often go very deep, so they're much better protected against, because what happens is you're in a young vine, the roots are closer to the surface. And so in very hot weather, when everything's getting really dry, they're much more impacted by the outside temperature. Whereas with old vines where the roots are lower, then they can get their nutrients and their water from lower down. And so, yeah, so they also have, we hope, greater ability to kind of withstand these drought summers.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't have said that better. And I think when people are probably saying, so then why do they get wrapped up? Well, there's a number of reasons, but quite honestly, one of the reasons is production, because unfortunately with old vines, as you get older, you get more quality effectively at one point, and obviously you sort of peak at quality at a certain level, but quality falls typically from versus a young producing vine. So
You're right,
clearly,
much less quantity.
exactly. So if you're a wine producer and you own that land, you're obviously wanting to potentially maximize as much of the produce as you can, which, as we all know, is not necessarily the best thing, because it doesn't mean that it's going to be the best wine, but it is the most, and therefore they are getting paid typically sometimes by quantity rather than quality. And this is what we're sort of trying to change with the industry as well, is obviously respect the elders, respect the grandparents. You shouldn't be uprooting them.
Yeah, I totally agree. Oh, good. Well, I'm so happy that we both picked something with that message.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. And I guess this just draws, I could talk to you for hours, quite honestly, but I know that you're extremely busy, and with Emperor obviously round the corner, I think you'll be hopefully putting your feet up this week as much as you can before it starts to get busy again with all those investment decisions and requirements and tastings and advertising of what's coming up. What outside of that, or maybe it's part of that actually, but I was going to say, what sort of have you got that you're looking forward to in 2024 that's sort of still to come, that you would say, or is there an area that you're sort of most keenly awaiting for the rest of the year?
So I write, we said at the beginning that I write about wines that go through the Place de Bordeaux that aren't necessarily from Bordeaux. And one of the areas that you get more and more wines from is Italy. And I think I also said that the first area that I really fell in love with was Italian wines. So I love that they're kind of coming out through the Place. And this summer, just for holiday, but I'm sure it will be mixed with a bit of visiting, we are going to Chianti for a week in July and staying at the Mazet property, and I'm so excited about that. Renting a place and going as tourists. I'm not going as a wine person, but I will definitely be doing some visits when I'm there, and I'm already dreaming of spending a week there in July.
That's phenomenal. Yeah. Again, I can't understand why you'd like that, Jane. Really, it's just it baffles me. But I'm actually trying to do a similar sort of thing, but for a shorter period of time. I think a long weekend, if I can squeeze it in, and I can convince the wife that actually it will be a holiday in inverted commas, but mostly it'll be tasting wine. But it's, you're absolutely right as well.
I think if it's in Italy, she'll probably be convinced, I would imagine.
Exactly. I don't think it's going to be a hard sell, is it, particularly? But I think in terms of sort of with the investment side of things as well, I would definitely say that there's definitely been a huge uptick in interest for Italian fine wine orientation as well. Certainly, you've probably, I would assume you've seen it as well, from given sort of the Bordeaux centric that you have in terms of other areas that are just sprouting out. California's getting a little bit of a push in certain sectors, Italy especially, and the Messetos and Sasakais and things like that that are obviously really coming through. And it's great to see. I think great to see sort of the different opportunities that are arising. But yeah, no, it's been absolutely amazing speaking to you, Jane. As I said, I could have spoken to you for hours and hours. I really could. And as I mentioned, you will always be to me the voice of Bordeaux. So if I've ever got a question, unfortunately, that does mean I'll be sending you lots of emails occasionally.
Good. I couldn't be happier.
But thank you ever so much. It's been a brilliant guest. It's been amazing. And I can't wait to see what Jane Anson has to offer in the coming months. Obviously, with your mentoring as well, that's fantastic. And just a reminder for everybody, please make sure that you do apply before the deadline. You've got a few days left, but not too many. So do get your applications in to Jane. And it's been brilliant. Thank you ever so much for sharing those moments with us and sharing your time. And I look forward to seeing you in the future.
Yeah, me too, Andrew. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Jane.
Thank you.